everyone, this is Joe Drums coming to you. Hope everybody out there is doing great. I'm doing awesome. I wanted to talk to you guys about a new movie that's going to be coming out in June here. Actually, it's a documentary about a famous group of musicians called the Wrecking Crew. And it's going to be released on DVD here in June, I think in the next couple weeks. So I'm going to pick that up as well. I saw the trailer, and it's basically about these group of musicians that came from the LA area that were hired to play basically on a lot of people's famous recordings, records, albums, and also TV shows. They did TV theme songs, they did movie theme songs. The list goes on and on of what these actual musicians have done. One drummer in particular that's played with the Wrecking Crew was Hal Blaine. And many years ago, when I was really young, I used to sit and watch a TV channel or TV show called The Partridge Family. And of course, the Monkees was on, and these guys had played all the music for those famous TV shows. And of course, you know, me seeing the little boy as a drummer, I thought, wow, that's really cool. I want to do that. And so it got me intrigued into finding out who these people actually were. Right now I've got Hal Blaine up here. This is kind of a video from him. You can pull these up on YouTube. If you look up Hal Blaine, he's on there. The Wrecking Crew actually consisted of, it looked like about maybe 45 members. There was, I'll kind of go through the list. Don Randy, keyboard. Leon Russell, keyboard. Joe Osborne, bass. Larry Nechtil, keyboard. Billy Strange, guitar. Earl Palmer, drums. Plas Johnson, saxophone. Bill Pittman, guitar. Al Casey, guitar. Barney Kessel, guitar. James Burton, guitar. Lyle Ritz, bass. Mike Deasy on guitar. Dr. John, keyboard. Don Peake, guitar. Jim Gordon, drums. And I could sit here and name more and more people. There's just so many different ones. But if you look up the Wrecking Crew band members, it'll be up on Wikipedia. You can see all the different musicians that played on, you know, the Beach Boys records, Sonny and Cher, Sinatra, Nancy Sinatra. The list just goes on and on what these people actually did. It's amazing, you know, what they've accomplished. And really, nobody knew who they were. So if you get a chance, check out the documentary movie. It's called The Wrecking Crew. I think it's, like I said, it's going to be coming out in the next couple weeks on DVD. So I'm going to get it myself. Another one that's really good is called Whiplash. If you guys haven't seen that movie, that's about a drummer that's going to a music school, and the teacher gives him more than he bargained for through this. So if you haven't seen it already, it's a great movie. I've already seen it like 3 or 4 times. I went and bought the movie. There's some really, there's a really cool documentary on there with a lot of famous drummers talking about how they got started on the Blu-ray version of Whiplash. So if you got, you know, some extra cash laying around and you guys want to check out some really interesting talk on there, there's a really good documentary on the Whiplash Blu-ray DVD. So we're going to listen to an excerpt that I took off of a radio station. This is Hal Blaine talking to a person about how it was in the Wrecking Crew. So I thought I'd share that with you. I've had it for a while, and it's really interesting. So you guys take care, keep rocking. I'll talk to you soon, and probably the next video you'll see me doing some more drumming. So until then, you guys take care, keep rocking. We'll see you next time.
This is Fresh Air. I'm David B. Cooley in for Terry Gross. The new documentary, The Wrecking Crew, tells the story of what may be the most successful group of studio and session musicians in music history. This anonymous collection of players can be heard on many hits of the 1960s and 70s. Songs by such artists as the Beach Boys, the Byrds, Frank Sinatra, Leslie Gore, the Mamas and the Papas, the Monkees, and Nat King Cole. The musicians were used by music producer Phil Spector to create his wall of sound. Our next guest, drummer Hal Blaine, is featured in the documentary and is credited for coming up with the group's nickname, the Wrecking Crew. In March 2000, Hal Blaine was one of the first 5 sidemen inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's featured on thousands of records and over 40 #1 hits. Terry interviewed him in 2001. They started with one of his hits from 1963. That year alone, Hal Blaine played on Then He Kissed Me, Da Do Ron Ron, Another Saturday Night, Surf City, Surfer Girl, Surfin' USA.
Hal Blaine, welcome to Fresh Air.
Thank you very much.
Now, is the opening on Be My Baby, was that drum line your idea?
This was the beginnings of rock and roll. Somehow, with my experience, I keep thinking that I was an awfully good faker. And it could be that the lick went boom, 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 with a backbeat. Boom, 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 boom. And at one point, while we were rolling, I may have missed the second beat. So we went boom, 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 and it stuck. It became a hook, and of course, one of the most famous hooks in rock and roll. That also happened to me, just to get off the beaten track. It also happened to me with the Tijuana Brass when we did A Taste of Honey. The song goes da 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 da, and everybody comes in da da ba da da. Well, unfortunately, nobody was coming in together. It was like a train wreck. So at one point, me and my comedic mind, they went ba da 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 da, and I looked at the band and I started slugging with my bass drum. Boom, 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 diddle 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 diddle. Everybody came in. And once again, that became a major hook for that song. It happened to be my first record of the year.
Hal Blaine, what are some of the other records that had the most memorable beats that you played?
Well, I remember doing a record with Sam Cooke, Another Saturday Night it was called. And that was another one with that same drum lick every 8 or 16 bars, whatever it was. Dig-a-dig, dig, 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 dig. And all these drum licks kind of became the standard for rock and roll. You know, all the drummers that I've spoken with through the years have told me that they grew up listening to the records that I played on, and that's how they learned. And I grew up listening to Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich, and that's how I learned.
In fact, I bet you've been to countless restaurants where people have been playing your rhythms on the table.
That has happened, I guess, in the past, you know. Sometimes I've actually, it's funny you mentioned that, I've actually turned around to someone and said, do me a favor and let me play the drums. In a nice way.
Right.
Where I would explain to them that they were trying to play their fingers along with whatever the music was playing, coming out of the speakers in the restaurant. That actually has happened to me, which is kind of funny that you would hit on that.
Now, you did a lot of records with Phil Spector, including Be My Baby.
Yes.
What are some of the things he had you do that other session heads didn't? What was different about working with Phil Spector?
Well, first of all, every Phil Spector session was a party. Everyone on the session, all the guys and girls, were the first call people. Everyone wanted to work with Phil Spector because they knew that some kind of a hit record, I mean, it was the talk of the town. Phil Spector was the guy that everyone wanted to see how he worked. He had a big sign on the door that said, closed session, and yet anyone who stuck their head in, he'd grab them and he'd shove them in the studio, and he'd say, Hal, give him a tambourine or a shaker or some claves, some noisemakers, let him play something.
Did Spector hum for you or clap for you, the kind of things that he wanted, the sound that he wanted?
Not on drum, not for drums. Phil used to use me like a racehorse. He would have me sitting there while he rehearsed. He would keep me from rehearsing, and I'd be chomping at the bit. I want to play. And finally, he would point to me. He used to be in the booth, and he'd run back and forth. They had a huge window, and he'd run back and forth like he was conducting a symphony, and he'd look at the strings and use certain, symphonic movements or the way a conductor would do. And he would look at me, and he would say, now. And I knew he was saying now, which meant go for it. And I guess I used to go nuts sometimes on those drums, because if you listen to some of the fade endings on just about all those records, We used to go into double times and all kinds of things that were not unheard of on records. And everybody would go wacko. And then there was a time when Phil threatened to put out a record or an album of all the fades that we did. And the fades, if for those who don't know what a fade is, it just means when you hear a record playing and it gets to the end and it gets softer and softer and softer and it's gone. That's called the fade. With Phil, it went on forever. And finally, when everyone had had enough, and I always kind of had that feeling I knew when it was, I would go into my quarter note triplets against whatever was being played.
Clap a quarter note triplet for us.
Well, in other words, it's over, and I go da 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 da. So everyone knew, here it is, this is it. And Phil would never stop the machine until I played those quarter note triplets. So they're on the end of every record.
The musicians who you used to play with on rock and roll sessions were known as the Wrecking Crew. Why were they called the Wrecking Crew?
In the late 50s, we started playing rock and roll when a lot of people said it was a dirty word. They didn't want to hear that kind of music. They thought the musicians were just rank amateurs. They had no idea that we were all well-learned and studied musicians with degrees and so forth playing music. And the old-timers, the guys that we kind of replaced, used to say, these kids are going to wreck the business. And I just automatically started calling us the Wrecking Crew. And then I became a contractor very early on, doing the hiring for the sessions that I was playing on. And I just started, people would call me and they'd say, get your crew together. And I'd say, okay, the Wrecking Crew, here we go. And I'd make calls. Eventually I had a secretary who made all my calls and so forth. So the Wrecking Crew stuck.
You were the drummer on a lot of the Beach Boys records.
Just about all.
But I think it was Dennis who was actually
yes,
the drummer with the band. I imagine at the time nobody knew that he wasn't the drummer on the records.
A lot of people did not know in the early days that Dennis did not play on those things. Sometimes Dennis would come in and overdub a tambourine or something.
So did Dennis feel bad that instead of him it was you on the records?
I tell you, I've told the story before. Dennis loved the fact that while I was in the studio in the afternoon making $35, $40 for the afternoon, Dennis that night was making $35,000 or $40,000 on stage. I mean, they were making a lot of money. And he was thrilled that he could just be on his boat. He didn't have to be in the studio. He didn't have to rehearse.
Well, let me rephrase the question. Did you feel resentful then that he was making all this money on stage and you were making next to nothing in the studio?
Not at all, because I knew what it was leading to, because my phone started ringing off the hook from Phil Spector dates and Beach Boys dates.
Right.
All of a sudden I was getting calls for Elvis Presley and Johnny Rivers, and Fifth Dimension came along, and Mamas and the Papas. I mean, everybody came out of the woodwork.
Is there a Beach Boys track that you particularly like your drumming on that we can play?
Well, there are certain songs that make you cry. Songs like God Only Knows, one of the beautiful songs. Good Vibrations, of course, was another sort of a trilogy of Brian put that song together. Sometimes we would do, 5 minutes on a session, and he'd say thank you, and sometimes we would work for days putting that song together. He just used to use little bits and pieces of this, that, and the other. I remember that on one of the sessions, and I think it was part of the Good Vibrations, Brian wanted something different, a different sound with drums or percussion. We used to drink a lot of orange juice, and they came in little small bottles out of a vending machine. And I took 3 of those bottles, taped them together, cut the tops off to various sizes, almost like the tubes on a vibraphone. And there were three different sounds, and I used a mallet that would be used on a vibraphone, and I got this knocking sound. Three different knocking sounds. And I used it on that section where we were playing ba-da-da, boo-doo-doo, ba-da-da. Well, I was playing ba-da-da, ba-da-da, different tones.
Was Hal Blaine on drums and percussion? Now, Hal Blaine, we've been talking about your rock and roll sessions. You also worked with Sinatra. Did you have to get a different kind of beat when you were working with Sinatra? As a jazz singer, Sinatra was more behind the beat. Rock and roll tends to be very on the beat.
One of our secrets to rock and roll was learning to lay back. And we used to, in other words, if you were looking at a scale on a ruler, every time your backbeat came on, 1, 2, 3, 4, every time we'd hit 2 and 4, it would be just a hair behind that actual 2 and 4. That was how I got the great feeling going all the time with Joe Osborne, the great bass player, and Larry Knechtel. You know, we were known as the three killers who used to come in and make these, like, Bridge Over Troubled Water, records like that were just so incredible. All Grammy winners. You mentioned Be My Baby, boom, 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 bang, boom, 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 bang. When I did the record Strangers in the Night with Frank, which was Record of the Year, and his only gold single, believe it or not, that went right to number 1, I was playing the same beat, quietly. Strangers in the night, boom, ba 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 ba, boom, ba 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 ba, boom.
What was the rehearsal like with Sinatra, and what was the recording session like?
Well, generally, when you got a Sinatra call, it was a 6-hour call. Now, the standard is a 3-hour session. With Frank Sinatra, we would have a 6-hour double session call. 3 hours, an hour break, and then 3 hours of recording. We would go in for the first 3 hours and rehearse whatever the song or songs were to make sure that we absolutely had it down pat. The engineers would go through all the lines to make sure that there were no glitches, no squeaks, no white noise, no red noise. They would go through all the chairs that the strings especially were sitting on, make sure that there were no squeaks, make sure that everyone had the lights on their music stands, no music stand rattles. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Because when Frank Sinatra walked in to record, he walked in, he walked around with 2, 3 of us, 4 of us, said, "Hi, how you doing? Let's make a record." And bang, he was in the vocal booth and we were making a record. No fooling around, no mistakes, no nothing. Rarely did he ask to do a second take. Frank always knew what he was doing. He had rehearsed himself. He knew the songs. And Frank was the kind of guy that once he walked out of the vocal booth, he'd say, "Thank you all." He was gone with his entourage. That was it.
You've been on about 8,000 different songs that have been recorded. Do you actually remember what you were on, or do you have to consult a list to figure out if you were on
Well,
something?
it depends. Obviously, I had all those records of the year, the Grammy winner of the year, and I don't have to think about those records. I know those records backwards. When it comes to certain songs, it was just a blur of so many songs and so many sessions. I don't know. It's very difficult to explain, Terry. I just played what I felt, and they let me play. You know, once you kind of make a name for yourself, then when producers would come in, they would say, "Oh, Hal, just do your thing. You know, don't worry about it. Just whatever you feel." They felt that I would always do the right thing.
Drummer Hal Blaine speaking to Terry Gross in 2001. He's featured in the new documentary The Wrecking Crew, which opens today in theaters in New York and L.A. and additional cities in coming weeks. The film also is available now through iTunes and video on demand.